Welcome to my YouTube channel. Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe and tap the bell icon. The air was thick with tension as Mark and Emily made their way through the grandiose glass doors of the jewelry store. The moment they entered, the sound of the world outside seemed to fade into the background. Their footsteps echoed in the marble-floored lobby. The glittering rows of diamonds and gold watches were displayed like works of art under soft, inviting lighting. But for Mark and Emily, the sight of the gleaming treasures felt like a world they could only dream of. They stood still for a moment, feeling out of place in the sleek, polished surroundings. The store manager, a woman with sharp eyes and a perfectly pressed suit, barely glanced at them as they approached the display cases. Mark exchanged an awkward glance with Emily, a silent understanding passing between them. Neither of them had ever seen such opulence up close, let alone imagined stepping into such a store. "Can I help you?" The manager's voice was polite, but it carried an undertone that made it clear she wasn't expecting much from this couple. Emily swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly as she ran a finger along the glass case. "We were just looking," she said, her voice softer than usual. She felt out of place here, but there was something inside her that couldn't resist the allure of it all. The thought of owning even one of those pieces felt like a distant fantasy. Mark nodded beside her, his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't have much hope for anything to come from this visit, but he knew how much Emily had dreamed of owning something beautiful, something precious. It was a fleeting thought, an impossible one, but still, he could feel the excitement in her eyes. "Are you sure?" The manager's gaze flicked between the two of them, her lips curving into a faint, polite smile. "Perhaps you'd like to see our newest collection? It's exclusive, and we have a few pieces that might interest you." Emily felt a flush creep up her neck. The offer seemed both kind and condescending at once, and she wasn't sure how to respond. She opened her mouth to decline, but before she could say anything, the manager turned her back on them and spoke to a colleague in a hushed tone. Mark felt the weight of her words, though he couldn't hear them. Emily's hand tightened on his arm, and for a brief moment, he considered pulling her out of the store. They didn't belong here, he thought. Not with the people who walked past them, their heads held high, glancing at the jewels as if they were part of their everyday life. But just as they were about to turn toward the door, the manager returned, her voice suddenly cold. "I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave. Our store only caters to customers of a certain caliber, and I'm afraid we're unable to accommodate you." The words were a slap to the face. Mark's heart sank. He could feel his ears buzzing with embarrassment, and Emily's face turned pale. They hadn't done anything wrong, had they? They hadn't touched anything, hadn't tried to haggle for a discount. They had only walked in, only stood there, trying to get a glimpse of a world they could never be part of. "Excuse me?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "We haven't done anything." The manager's gaze was impassive. "It's just company policy," she said, her tone final. Mark's fists clenched at his sides. "So, you're kicking us out because we're not rich enough?" His voice was thick with the sting of humiliation. The manager didn't respond. She simply gave a curt nod, signaling to a security guard standing nearby. The guard, tall and intimidating, stepped forward with a firm expression. He placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. "Sir, please leave the premises," the guard said. Mark opened his mouth to protest, but Emily grabbed his arm, her face flushed with a mix of anger and shame. They didn't belong here. They had never belonged here, but they hadn't expected to be rejected so blatantly. As they left the store, Mark's mind raced. How could they have treated us like that? He was used to rejection, but this was something else. The feeling of being dismissed, not even given the chance to explain, stung more than he had expected. Emily was silent beside him, her head lowered, as they walked out into the bright sunlight. "Let's just go home," she said softly. Her voice was distant, as if she had already shut herself off from the world. Mark didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. They didn't belong in that store, and they didn't belong to a world like that. But then, just as they reached the street corner, Emily's phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, her expression changing in an instant from confusion to shock. "Mark, it's the lawyer." The words hit him like a wave of cold water. The lawyer? They hadn't heard from him in years. What could this be about now? They had never expected to hear from the lawyer again, not after all these years. Emily's hands shook as she unlocked her phone, her eyes scanning the message. The text was brief, but it held weight in every word. "Mark," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We've inherited everything." Mark's stomach dropped. He reached for the phone, his heart pounding in his chest as he read the words for himself. It wasn't a prank, it wasn't some kind of joke. The message was clear: they had inherited a fortune. Everything, from properties to investments, jewelry, and more, had been passed down to them. "We don't know anyone with that kind of money," Mark said, his voice shaking. He barely recognized his own words. The reality of what he was reading didn't make sense. Emily's eyes were wide with disbelief. "But, why us? How? We've never even heard of this before." The message was followed by a legal document, outlining the details of their inheritance. The lawyer had arranged a meeting for them at the office the following day. They were heirs to an unimaginable fortune, but there were so many questions. Who had left them this wealth? What had they missed? And why now? Mark took a deep breath, trying to process everything, but it was as if the world around him had stopped making sense. "This can't be real," he thought. "This must be some mistake." As they stood there in the street, the weight of the situation was almost too much to bear. They had been humiliated in the store just moments ago, and now they were being thrust into a reality they couldn't even begin to understand. Their lives had just turned upside down, but the mystery of how and why was something they hadn't even begun to unravel. Before they could gather their thoughts, a sleek black limousine pulled up beside them, the tinted windows sliding down slowly. Mark didn't know what to expect, but a man in an impeccably tailored suit leaned forward, his gaze locked on them. "Mark and Emily?" The man's voice was smooth, controlled, but it carried a weight of authority that made Mark's skin crawl. "Who are you?" Mark demanded, his pulse quickening. The man didn't smile, but his eyes glinted with something that Mark couldn't quite place. "We need to talk. You've inherited more than you realize." As the man spoke, the mystery deepened. They had been thrust into something far larger than they could ever have imagined, and they had no idea where it would lead. Their quiet, simple life was over, and what lay ahead was a path filled with uncertainty, danger, and revelations that would change everything. The sleek black limousine, its windows tinted and gleaming under the afternoon sun, seemed to hover in the space between confusion and realization. Mark and Emily stood frozen on the sidewalk, their hearts racing, their minds a blur. The man inside the car, the one who had called their names, remained silent, waiting. Mark exchanged a glance with Emily, his eyes searching hers for any sign of what to do next. He wanted to refuse, to walk away from whatever this was. But there was something in the man's demeanor, his calm, almost predatory stillness, that made it impossible to ignore. Emily, still holding her phone tightly in her hand, seemed equally uncertain, but curiosity flickered in her gaze. "Mark," she whispered. This has to be real. Why else would the lawyer send us this message?" Mark wasn't sure. Everything about the situation felt surreal. He had no idea who this lawyer was, or why they had been chosen, but one thing was clear: their lives were about to change. And as much as Mark wished to stay in the safe, quiet world they had known, part of him was already itching to uncover the truth, to know who had left them this fortune, and why. With a deep breath, Mark nodded toward the limousine. "We should go. Let's see what this is all about." They slowly approached the car, the sound of their footsteps oddly muted on the busy city sidewalk. The man inside the car didn't move a muscle, his gaze never wavering from them as they climbed in. The interior of the car was luxurious, leather seats, rich wood paneling, and a subtle fragrance that filled the air. It felt as though they had stepped into another world, a world they had never dreamed of entering. As they sat down, the man in the suit, who looked to be in his early 40s with short-cropped hair and a serious expression, didn't speak for a moment. The silence between them was thick, charged with an unspoken tension. Mark couldn't help but feel that he was being evaluated, like a bug under a microscope. Finally, the man spoke, his voice low and smooth. "My name is Charles Hawke. I represent the estate of your late relative, Jonathan Stone." Mark's heart skipped a beat. Jonathan Stone? The name didn't ring any bells. They didn't have any relatives by that name. He exchanged another glance with Emily, her brows furrowed in confusion. "I know this must be a lot to take in," Charles continued, his voice unflinching. "But there is no mistake. Jonathan Stone was your great-uncle. He passed away recently, and he left you both his entire estate. Everything." Emily's face paled. "Our great-uncle," she repeated, the words barely leaving her lips. "But we've never even met him." "That's correct," Charles replied. "You didn't know him. But he knew you. He watched you both, from afar. And now, it's time for you to learn the truth about your family's legacy." The car began moving, pulling away from the curb, but Mark barely noticed the passing scenery. His mind was spinning. How could this be true? They had no idea who Jonathan Stone was. They hadn't even heard his name before. "Why now?" Mark asked, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "Why wait until now to contact us? We haven't even heard of this person." Charles's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes narrowed slightly, as though calculating the weight of every word he spoke. Jonathan Stone had his reasons. He lived a quiet life, and he chose to keep his wealth and his connections hidden. His reasons for leaving everything to you will be revealed in time. But you have to understand, your inheritance is more than just money. It's an obligation. A duty. Mark's mind raced. A duty to do what? Charles didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured to the small, leather-bound briefcase sitting beside him. "You'll have all the answers you need soon enough. But before we go any further, I need you both to sign these papers. It's a formality. Nothing to worry about. Just acknowledging that you accept the inheritance." Emily hesitated, her eyes flicking to Mark, who seemed just as unsure. The papers looked official enough, legal documents filled with fine print. They weren't sure what they were signing, but the thought of walking away from it all felt impossible. Could they really turn their backs on this? Reluctantly, they both signed the papers. There was something almost surreal about the act, signing away their old lives without truly understanding what they were stepping into. Charles smiled slightly as he took the papers from them, tucking them into the briefcase with a practiced motion. "Excellent. Now, we can begin." He sat back in his seat and looked at them, his fingers steepled in front of his lips. Jonathan Stone wasn't just a wealthy man. He was a man with a vast network of secrets, secrets that you will soon come to inherit. Your journey won't be easy. You'll face challenges, obstacles that you can't yet comprehend. Mark felt a cold chill run down his spine. What kind of challenges? Charles's gaze turned dark, and his voice dropped to a whisper. The kind that will make you question everything you know about your family. The kind that will force you to confront a past that has been buried for decades. Emily's voice was shaky. What are you talking about? Charles paused, allowing the silence to stretch for a moment, before he finally spoke again. Jonathan Stone wasn't just hiding wealth. He was hiding something far more dangerous. Something that, if exposed, could ruin everything. But I believe you are the right people to handle it. You're his heirs, after all. Mark and Emily exchanged uncertain glances. We don't understand, Mark said. Why us? Why did he choose us? Charles didn't offer a direct answer. Instead, he opened the briefcase in front of him, revealing a stack of papers, photos, and what looked like an old journal. Everything will make sense in time. But for now, you must go to his estate. There are things there that will help you understand. You'll find the first clue waiting for you. The limousine pulled into a quiet, secluded area, far from the city's bustling streets. The house that loomed ahead was massive, an old, Gothic-style mansion with towering spires and ivy-covered walls. It looked like something out of a fairy tale, only there was no beauty here, just an overwhelming sense of foreboding. The car came to a stop in front of the mansion, and Charles opened the door. You'll find your way inside. Follow the clues. Mark and Emily stepped out of the car, their feet crunching on the gravel driveway. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood. They stood there for a moment, staring up at the mansion, unsure of what to do next. Are we really doing this? Emily asked quietly, her voice trembling. We don't have a choice, Mark replied. He turned to face the mansion, a mix of fear and determination in his eyes. Let's find out what we're dealing with. As they made their way toward the massive front door, a strange sense of unease settled over them. The house seemed to watch them, its dark windows like eyes, waiting. The door creaked open as they pushed it, revealing a vast, dimly lit foyer. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of aged wood and dust. Shadows stretched across the walls, and the faint sound of a clock ticking echoed through the hall. As they stepped further inside, Emily noticed an old portrait hanging on the wall. The man in the painting had sharp features, a stern look in his eyes, a man who looked eerily similar to the photo Charles had shown them in the car. Jonathan Stone. I don't like this, Emily muttered. Her voice barely broke the silence as she turned to Mark. What if this was all a mistake? Mark didn't respond. He was too focused on the hallway ahead. Something told him that they were at the edge of something far bigger than they had ever imagined. As they moved deeper into the house, the only light came from flickering candles placed on old wooden tables, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. It was a scene straight out of a mystery novel, one that they were now living. At the end of the hallway, a door stood ajar. Behind it, something dark and foreboding waited. The door creaked open slowly, revealing an interior that seemed to belong in another time. Mark and Emily stood at the threshold, hesitant. The shadows in the room danced with the flickering candlelight, casting strange and distorted shapes on the walls. Their breath was shallow, a mixture of fear and anticipation swirling between them. The mansion, already a labyrinth of dark corridors and forgotten corners, had drawn them further into its depths. They had entered one room after another, each filled with old furniture, dusty portraits, and strange, cryptic objects. But this room, this chamber, felt different. It had an air of secrecy, of something that had been hidden away for decades, something no one was meant to find. Emily took a step forward, her fingers brushing the edge of the doorframe. What is this place? She whispered, almost afraid that speaking too loudly would make the house itself react. Mark's eyes scanned the room, taking in the odd assortment of items that filled it. The walls were lined with bookshelves, but not with ordinary books. These shelves held old tomes, their covers leather-bound and cracked with age. A large, antique desk sat against one wall, papers scattered across its surface. The heavy scent of incense lingered in the air, mixed with the musty smell of old books and forgotten memories. At the far end of the room stood a tall, ornate mirror. It was framed in dark wood, carved with intricate designs of leaves and vines. It was strange, there was something almost alive about it. The surface shimmered, though no one had moved in front of it. This place feels wrong, Emily said, her voice trembling. Like something's been hidden here for a reason. Mark couldn't agree more. His heart beat faster as he stepped into the room, his boots making a hollow sound against the cold, stone floor. He moved toward the desk, his eyes drawn to a series of papers scattered across it. Most of them were written in a language he didn't understand, the ink faded, as though they had been written centuries ago. But one document stood out, an old, yellowing letter with the name Jonathan Stone written in bold letters at the top. Without a word, Mark picked it up, his hands trembling as he unfolded it. He could feel the weight of its history, its significance, pressing down on him. The letter was dated from years before, written in Jonathan Stone's neat, precise handwriting. As Mark began to read, his eyes quickly scanned the words, and a sense of dread settled over him. To my heirs, the ones who will come after me, I leave you this final message. What you are about to discover will not only change your lives but could very well destroy you. Your family is not what it seems. You are descendants of a long line of individuals who have been connected to forces greater than your understanding. These forces have been hidden from you for a reason. The wealth you now possess is not just material, it is a key to something that has been buried for centuries. You will find the answers you seek within this house. But be warned, there is a price to pay for uncovering the truth. Mark's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a simple inheritance, it was a legacy tied to something much darker than they had ever imagined. He looked up at Emily, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. What does this mean? He asked, though he wasn't sure if he wanted to know the answer. Before Emily could respond, a sound echoed through the room, a soft click, followed by the creaking of hinges. Mark turned toward the sound, his heart jumping into his throat. The mirror, the one that had seemed so ordinary moments ago, was slowly opening, revealing a hidden passage behind it. Emily gasped. That wasn't there before. Mark swallowed hard, the weight of the moment sinking in. He could feel the pull of the passage, the urge to step forward and discover what lay beyond. But there was also fear, deep, primal fear. What if this was all some kind of trap? What if they were not meant to find what lay hidden here? But there was no turning back now. Whatever was waiting behind that mirror, it was part of the mystery. It was part of the legacy Jonathan Stone had left for them. And they needed to know the truth. Let's go, Mark said, his voice a low murmur. We have to find out what's behind this. Emily nodded, though her expression was one of reluctance. She reached out and grabbed his hand, squeezing it tightly. I'm scared, Mark. I know, he replied, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. But we're in this together. Whatever it is, we face it as a team. They moved toward the mirror, the hairs on the back of their necks standing on end. As they passed through the opening, the air seemed to grow colder, heavier, as if the very walls of the mansion were closing in around them. The passage was narrow, lit only by a faint, flickering light at the far end. Mark could hear his own breath, loud in the silence, and the echo of their footsteps on the stone floor. The walls seemed to pulse with an energy that made him uneasy, as though something was watching them, following their every move. At the end of the corridor, they found a wooden door, ancient and worn, its surface covered in strange symbols. It looked as though it had never been opened in centuries. Mark hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the door handle. Was it wise to open it? Should they turn back? Emily's voice broke through his thoughts. We have to open it, Mark. Whatever's behind that door, it's the answer. With a deep breath, he turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room beyond was unlike anything they had seen before. It was a small, circular chamber, the walls lined with shelves filled with strange artifacts. Jars of unknown substances, old books with symbols etched into their covers, and odd tools that Mark couldn't even begin to identify. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, upon which rested an ancient-looking book, its cover made of dark, worn leather. This was it. This was what they had come for. Mark stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the book. As he approached, he felt an almost magnetic pull toward it, as though it was calling to him. He reached out with a trembling hand and opened the book. The pages were yellowed and fragile, the text written in the same strange language he had seen earlier. But at the very back of the book, there was a single, handwritten page in English. To the ones who read this, know that you are the last of your bloodline. Your family is the keeper of a secret that has been passed down for generations. Your wealth, your power, it was all earned through dark dealings, through pacts made long ago with forces beyond the natural world. You have been chosen to continue what has been set in motion. But understand this, once you open this door, there is no going back. The price of knowledge is steep. The legacy of your family will demand a sacrifice. Mark's hands shook as he read the words, his mind reeling. This was no ordinary inheritance. This was something dark, something that tied them to forces they couldn't even begin to understand. Emily's voice trembled as she spoke. What do we do now? Mark closed the book slowly, his eyes still fixed on the page. I don't know, he whispered. But I think we're already too deep in. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the hallway outside the chamber. The sound of footsteps approached, heavy, hurried steps. Someone was coming. Emily grabbed Mark's arm, her grip tight. We have to leave, now. But before they could move, the door to the chamber slammed shut, locking them inside. The walls seemed to close in on Mark and Emily as the door slammed shut behind them. The air in the small, dimly lit chamber grew thick with tension, and for the first time, Mark truly felt the weight of the situation. They were trapped. There was no way out. No escape. Emily gripped his arm with a force that surprised him. Her breath was rapid, her eyes wide with panic. What's happening? What do we do now, Mark? Mark's mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. The letter, the mirror, the book, they had uncovered something that wasn't just a mystery. It was a curse, a legacy of dark forces that had shaped their family for generations. And now they were part of it. There was no going back. We have to find a way out of here, Mark said, his voice steady, even though his heart was pounding in his chest. But we need answers. We need to know what this is all about. Emily's eyes darted around the room. But how? The door's locked. We're stuck. He looked at the door, studying it. The heavy wooden structure was ancient, but it had no visible lock, just a simple handle. He tried pulling at it, but it wouldn't budge. It was as though it had been sealed shut by some unseen force. A sudden sound broke through the silence. A soft, hollow thud echoed from the far side of the room, followed by another, then a third. Mark turned toward the sound, his body tense, every muscle coiled in fear. Something was moving, something was approaching. Emily's hand flew to her mouth in shock. What is that? Mark's gaze shifted to the far corner of the room, where the shadows seemed to deepen, growing thicker and more oppressive. The air felt colder, and he could almost taste the fear in his throat. His eyes locked onto a figure emerging from the darkness. A tall, thin man stepped into the light, his face obscured by a hood. His clothes were tattered, his skin pale and ashen. He moved with an unnatural grace, like a shadow coming to life. Mark's heart skipped a beat. This was no ordinary person, this was something else. Something that didn't belong in the world of the living. The man's voice broke the silence, a low rasp that seemed to reverberate through the very walls of the chamber. You've come too far, Mark. Too far to turn back. Mark's chest tightened. Who are you? What is this place? The man took a step forward, his eyes glinting with an unsettling intensity. I am the keeper of the family's truth. The one who has watched over the bloodline for centuries. You are the last of your kind, the last to carry the curse, the legacy of what your ancestors have done. Curse? Emily whispered, her voice shaking. What curse? The man nodded, his expression unreadable. The curse of power, of wealth gained by dark means. Your family's fortune is not the result of hard work or inheritance. It was built on betrayal, on pacts made with forces that cannot be understood by the living. Mark took a step back, his mind struggling to process the words. No. That can't be true. My parents, they built everything from nothing. They didn't do anything wrong. The man's eyes darkened. You don't know the full truth, Mark. You never did. But now you will. The room seemed to grow colder still, the shadows creeping further into the corners of the chamber. The man raised his hand, and the room around them began to shift. The walls seemed to twist and warp, and the floor beneath them felt unstable. Mark staggered, grabbing Emily's arm to steady himself. What's happening? Emily gasped, her voice full of fear. The truth is being revealed, the man said. And you cannot escape it. Not anymore. With a sudden jolt, the chamber seemed to dissolve into the darkness. Mark's vision blurred, and he felt as though he was falling, spinning through time and space. The ground beneath him disappeared, and he found himself surrounded by images, flashes of memories that weren't his own. The past, the present, and the future collided in a dizzying array of images. Faces, places, moments. He saw his ancestors, their faces twisted in greed and ambition. He saw them making deals with shadowy figures, exchanging their souls for wealth and power. He saw his great-great-grandfather shaking hands with an entity that was not human, an ancient being that radiated darkness. And in that moment, Mark understood. This wasn't just a family fortune, it was a pact. A pact with forces that had shaped their bloodline for generations. A pact that demanded a price. And that price was coming due. Mark gasped for air, his chest heaving as the vision faded. The room reappeared around him, and he stumbled back, his mind racing. No, he whispered. No, this can't be real. This can't be happening. But the man was still there, his cold gaze fixed on him. You've seen the truth. Your family's wealth, their power, it wasn't earned. It was stolen. Stolen from the very forces that you now serve. What do you want from me? Mark demanded, his voice filled with a mix of anger and desperation. What do you want from Emily and me? The man's lips curled into a faint, almost pitying smile. What I want is irrelevant. What matters is what you want. You can choose to accept your family's legacy and continue the cycle. You can claim the power, the wealth, and live as your ancestors did, forever bound to the forces you bargained with. Or, you can choose to break the chain. Mark's mind reeled. The weight of the decision was too much. He had to choose between two paths, one that led to power, and one that led to freedom. But how could he break the chain? What would it cost him? What would it cost Emily? He turned to her, his eyes searching hers for any sign of what to do. But she was just as lost, just as terrified. Emily, Mark whispered. What do we do? I don't know what's right anymore. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for his hand and squeezed it tightly, her fingers cold with fear. I don't know either, she said softly. But we can't live like this. We can't keep carrying this burden. We have to make it stop. Mark nodded, a surge of determination flooding through him. He didn't want this dark legacy. He didn't want to live in the shadow of the past. He wanted to break free, to live his life without fear, without the chains of a curse he never asked for. Then we break it, Mark said, his voice filled with resolve. We break the chain. The man's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold indifference. You cannot escape what is yours by blood. The price will be steep. I'll pay whatever it takes, Mark said firmly. We'll pay it. The man's eyes glinted with a knowing darkness. So be it. The choice has been made. Suddenly, the chamber around them began to tremble. The walls shook violently, and the floor cracked open beneath their feet. Mark and Emily stumbled, struggling to keep their balance as the room threatened to collapse. The man's voice echoed in the chaos. Remember, Mark. There is no escape. There is only the price. The ground beneath them gave way, and everything went black. Epilogue. When Mark and Emily awoke, they found themselves lying in the middle of a vast, open field. The mansion, the chamber, the man, all of it had disappeared. The sky above them was clear, the sun shining brightly. They stood up slowly, still dazed, unsure of what had just happened. Had it all been a dream? Or had they truly broken the curse? As they looked around, Mark noticed something on the ground near them, a small, leather-bound book. The same book they had seen in the chamber. He picked it up, his heart pounding. It was empty, no words, no pages. Just a blank slate. It was over. Mark turned to Emily, his face solemn. We did it. We're free. But Emily only nodded, her face unreadable. Are we? She asked quietly. Are we truly free? Mark didn't have an answer. He only knew one thing. Whatever the future held, they had broken the chain. The legacy of their family, the curse, was gone. But was freedom truly worth the price? The answer, for now, remained a mystery.